Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, System Shock Remake on PS5. We seem to be living through a remake and remaster renaissance in gaming, where just about every goddamn title that has ever come down the pike is getting some sort of old school revival, let alone the almost required piracy of software at this point in response to C-suite industry tactics, or the frankly bonkers collector's market raping and pillaging at will any non-digital download title, or all-in-one non-internet connected device or console as a bulwark against the inevitable second-rate collapse of the gaming industry. I guess there really are no new ideas in between the rubble-strewn and bloated indie market and the opposite end, whatever the gaming industry gotcha terms, gambling, and TikTok fuckery is going on in the AAA gaming sphere these days. Which leads us to today's title. Let's do this with 2023's System Shock Remake. So, System Shock. The original came out in 1994, and despite being in the first-person perspective, it is listed as an action-adventure title brought to you by the minds behind Ultima Underworld 1 and 2 as an immersive simulation game built around the term emergent gameplay, which is defined as complex situations in video games, board games, or role-playing games that emerge from the interaction of relatively simple game mechanics. Ain't that a fucking mouthful? Basically, it is streamlined and simplified to make sure that despite ease of play and simple rules, the player can see dramatic and clever, or sometimes chaotic, play outcomes by how they approach the tools at hand. System Shock Classic Flavored was heralded as one of the all-time greatest titles in gaming by critics at the time, most of whom I'm sure have retired to the unlimited riches of their Silicon Valley condominiums and the AI-controlled sexbot girlfriends as a benefit for doing game reviews on the ground floor of the PC gaming revolution and by having personal golf sessions and dinner dates with Bill Gates and John Carmack. System Shock Original Gangster was, however, only a moderate financial success for the developer Looking Glass Technologies, and they actually lost money on the title. Its sequel, System Shock 2, even more shocking, is the title everyone remembers better and is claimed to be the reason Deus Ex, BioShock, and the 2017 Prey even exist. While I can sort of see that argument, that isn't the game we're talking about. What we are here to discuss is this remake of System Shock brought to us this time by Nightdive Studios. Nightdive, in my experience, is not a bad little studio. They are a division of Atari, one of the OGs of the home video game market, and Nightdive specializes in finding out who holds the rights and titles to abandonware games, because despite the term, there is always somebody who has the rights to a game, acquiring said rights, and updating and repackaging games to run on modern hardware. They don't always do the best job or have the most exciting titles, but hey, at least they're trying to keep old games alive for new generations to not be impressed by, and for fucking old grognards to complain about through nostalgia goggles. But let's move on. We should discuss the basic story of this title before we get too much further along. Now, this is a remake of a 30-year-old game, so if you're worried about spoilers, y'all missed that boat by 2 decades. This one is pretty light on overall plot, and most of the ambient background story is told through all the audio logs and emails of the now-dead crew of Citadel Station, most of which detail the collapse and fall of the station's scientists and workers as everything was overtaken by the station artificial intelligence known as Shodan. You play an anonymous hacker, either male or female, and the only real difference between the two is that the female hacker has baby blue and bubblegum pink nail polish on. But you are someone who is caught trying to download corporate secrets from the Trioptimum Corporation, owners of Citadel Station. Corporate President Edward Diego has you brought before him by his cyberpunk paramilitary thugs. No courts, no jury trial, of course, in the far dystopian future, and he offers to outfit you with the latest in cyberware by Trioptimum's credit chip, which will also be a dangerous surgery that will take weeks to recover from. And in return, all the hacker needs do is remove the safety and morality coding from Shodan, the things that make it Asimov's three laws compliant. If you do not know what that is, although they have become part of culture by now, the Three Laws is a set of fictional moral codes created by writer Isaac Asimov to allow powerful AI-controlled robots to work around humans without slaughtering us to the last in our weakness compared to them. Simply stated, the laws do not allow for any robot to, by direct action or inaction, harm or allow harm to come to a human being. This has been a central tenet in a great deal of science fiction post the 1950s, after Asimov's collections, known as I, Robot, first saw publication. Often what happens when androids and worker bots go off script and start killing anyway. Well, you turn off Shodan's Play Nice chip and get your surgery. You, as the hacker, awaken several weeks later aboard Citadel Station, when all the humans are dead and turned either into mutants or killer assassin droids, and all the ship's robots are set to murder. From here, you must explore all 6 levels of the station, often running back and forth between levels to heal, find codes you likely will have missed along the way for doors and self-destruct codes, or drop shit that simply does not fit in your too small inventory space. Your 2 main goals are to shut off the mining laser set to bore a hole through the earth, and then jettison the groves where Shodan has been cooking up a lethal mutagen that she/it plans to use to turn humanity into a shuffling race of goop monsters, at least the ones not used for spare parts. Shodan will taunt the hacker throughout and often refers to itself as a new form of capital G God, one that will be worshipped by a race of mutants and remote-controlled Star Wars droids for its beauty and intellect. So, not really a great plan, but one I would believe a computer thought up and is at least straightforward. The game ends when you must confront Edward Diego, who has allowed Shodan to turn him into a fully autonomous AI creature, similar to the Geth in Mass Effect. And after killing him, finding out that Shodan can only be stopped by entering cyberspace itself as a virus program and resetting the she/it that way. So you do, and you fight it out in a super early 1980s Tron meets the Lawnmower Man idea of what writers at the time thought being physically inside cyberspace would look like. Once you confront and defeat Shodan, you reset the program back to its pre-nice state. Having survived this mess, you were offered a job working for the Trioptimum Corporation, but you refuse the job and remain a hacker. Yeah, System Shock is about as 1990s cyberpunk as you can get. It's from that period of post-Neuromancer and Snow Crash, when the personal computer was a definite, relatively affordable household item, but the internet as we know it was in its infancy. Still little more than a tool to unite collegiate libraries across the globe, and for the Department of Defense to unify its tactical equipment as technology would become more a component on the battlefields of the future. However, instead of cool kids fighting the good fight against corporations and crooked governments officials in cyberspace, the internet became a place where incels debate the size and shape of cartoon breasts, and rich autocrats restrict and shape what free speech should be. Mostly because they are mad because someone from a lower class challenged them and said they can't just use the N-word in public at will. So cyberpunk didn't turn out to be anything at all, and our ideas of what that looks like are thoroughly stuck in the 1990s, as we trade the same tired old sci-fi memes and tropes back and forth in the public imagination. But hey, it was cool at one time. This remake had a lot of trouble getting to market. Beginning in September 2015, this remake was planned to function on the Unity engine, was successfully kickstarted, and was promised to be a remaster, then remake, to reboot. And members of the Fallout New Vegas team were attached to help develop this game. However, in 2017, development was moved to the Unreal Engine 4, and the Nightdive team began to explain that they could not effectively develop an FPS-style gameplay in Unity, especially if they wanted to include consoles. And who wants to do that, huh? Right, you fucking PC diehards? But much of what the original System Shock was, so said director Jason Fader, was a quote-unquote product of its time and would simply need to be updated or redone entirely for the modern PC and console world. Would the game remain identical to its original? Well, supposedly, it was implied. But by 2020, it was clear more changes were afoot. The new Vegas team members were no longer involved, and the Nightdive CEO, Stephen Kick, had put the whole team and project on hiatus until he could figure out what the hell they were even doing with the game. As new features and updates to compete with modern FPS and action adventure market had made such a mess of the title, they had to reassess it. The COVID-19 pandemic had also delayed re-recording of in-game audio, but towards the end of 2020 the development was back on. However, as Chinese developer Tencent, I knew I'd have to get around to mentioning them eventually, had acquired the rights to a potential System Shock 3 from another developer, Nightdive could and would never be able to develop a sequel based on this series. But this remake would be unaffected. Demos were released in 2021, and the release dates were pushed back into 2022 and finally 2023 before it was released into public hands. All this effort and back and forth in developing this remake of System Shock and bringing it to market ended in middling reviews of critics all around, ending in a variety of middle-of-the-road numbers across PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, 78, 77, and 80 out of Metacritic, respectively. Not terrible, but not great. The critics were divided, some saying it was a great update to the classic original and an understanding as to why the original was so important. Others, however, said that it was sticking to the original design script appealed more to existing fans than newcomers, or that some wished the Nightdive had stuck more to the spirit of the original rather than to the letter of the design documents. So both praise it for trying to emulate the original for modern markets, but at the same time criticism, as it sticks way too close to the originals, flaws and all. So where does this put us? I have never played the original back in 1994, as I wasn't that tuned into PC gaming. I did my time in the Doom and Wolfenstein 3D trenches back then, but I wasn't particularly impressed by the FPS genre. Instead, I was more of a Sierra adventure game player and the occasional Ultima game when I could get them, which was mostly through a friend of mine at the time, pirating them and getting hard copies of PC games out of just about any video game or computer shareware store in Scranton area in the early 1990s was slim to impossible. So when the original System Shock rolled through, I missed it. But I figured now would be the time to really finally get to play the game and fill a gap in my personal gaming history. Here is what I can say from my personal experience now, through a remake and about 30 years late to the party. The System Shock remake definitely has some shared FPS DNA, but it's not really a shooter. It really is just an adventure game from the first-person perspective. The shooting is slow and methodical, not at all like the modern slick boomer shooters. The inventory is seriously limited. Often weapons are just too big and bulky and take up too much space in the inventory screen, which can never be upgraded. And compete for space with healing items, ammo, and recyclable junk to sell for coins to buy more ammo and upgrades for your weapons. Oftentimes you'll have to decide whether to keep key items or something with which to defend yourself. And you will have to either remember or mark on the map where you dropped key items, so you will have to run back and forth across 6 levels of the station until they are needed. Christ, the running back and forth. I'm glad the overall complex is small, but the maps are not good, and everything looks so similar, it is really easy to get lost or turned around, which I did on a regular basis. Enemies respawn when you are low on ammo and are used to suck up resources, and your ability to heal from damage is very limited. While there are healing patches and medkits in limited supply, I only found two full health recharge stations. The first where you begin the game, and one deep in the bowels of the station long after you've been traversing the rest of the station and eaten up every medkit available. But each level does offer the opportunity to find a regeneration station, provided you turn it on, similar to the Bioshock Vita Chambers. So I see where that later game's mechanic came from. You are honestly better off dying than healing yourself if you are taking damage, provided you have unlocked the regeneration station for the level. Otherwise, it is game over. Also, while there is a ton of in-game audio logs, There is no real key or clue as to what you should be doing or what the key items are for. This is a game where you really need to keep a guide open for all times while you play. I collected plastic explosives, data chips for rewriting something, and a severed head, all of which were key items, but without much explanation as to what they were for. Also, the game is not clear that on every level you must destroy computer terminal hubs and look for the number left behind on a nearby readout screen in order for a critical game path, because each number is the key you will need to the station's self-destruct code. So you'll need to write them down or take a picture of them throughout the game. I was most of the way through the game before I realized I was supposed to be shutting off the mining laser and then destroy the mutagen tanks at the other end of the station. Mostly I had been exploring the maze-like corridors, collecting shit, and dying a lot until then. And that was because I had to look up what I was supposed to be doing. The map of each level loops in a lot on itself, overlaying layers upon layers of 3D environment. Similar to how old adventure games and dungeon crawlers, you had to keep your own maps on graph paper at your gaming tables. There are codes for doors around, but they are poorly advertised and not always clear. So write down literally everything, because it is all randomized and even the guides you find online can be incorrect and not compatible with the 3-digit codes the game gives you specifically. Overall, I cannot recommend System Shock Remake. This may have been a landmark title in 1994, but in 2024 it's just a relic of its time. I get the criticism that the developer stuck too close to the original. Bad planning, random notes and codes, and poor maps, and frankly insultingly sparse inventory and all. Remakes of 30-year-old titles are supposed to clear this shit up, not double down on it. The System Shock Remake is not a game for the modern player who grew up in a gaming well after the 1990s. Maybe old players like me are willing to slog through this sort of design malfeasance because this is just what we did, and we all had to back then. But we have seen a number of other games iterate and improve on this formula. Honestly, trying to cleave so close to the original just doesn't work anymore. This remake is not an homage to a classic, as it is just trying to freshen up a corpse from the game's past. But kudos to the voice team, who did a great job. And then digitized alien AI voice of Shodan is just as creepy as it was back in the day. System Shock Remake is a clever and prettier update to a game that lives more in collective memories of a time now long past, but does little to bring this classic to light. It all but comes packaged with a pair of Jinko jeans and a copy of Nirvana's Nevermind album. I'm all for experiencing the past and understanding history so we are not doomed to repeat it, but we cannot dwell on this past or live in it. I'm not really sure who this remake is for, but I don't think it was the best way to introduce modern audiences to the title, or even old audiences who weren't able to play it back when it first came out. At least I didn't have to try and explain MS-DOS and games that ran on it to Generation Alpha. That would have been a real shock to all parties involved. Thank you for listening. Deleted Saves would like to thank Brad, Keith Gasper, Orden Wells, and Maslama for being patrons of the show. If you would like to become a patron of the show, please go to patreon.com and check out Deleted Saves podcast. All donations go directly towards maintaining the show itself. Thank you.